Hello and welcome to this webinar on justifying network automation to execs. I am going to be your host and guide today. My name is Alex Henthorn-Iwane, and I am the head of marketing at OpsMill. And so today we're going to really be covering not so much a deep dive on exactly how to create a spreadsheet, but on how to build the case in a holistic fashion. So one of the things I think, and just to give a little bit of background on myself, I've been at OpsMill for about a year and a half, but before that have been in and around the networking and network automation and automation communities for quite a while. So, and have seen a lot of the struggles across many different startups and such of justifying investments. So this is why this topic was so interesting. It's also something that as the network automation community matures becomes more and more important. It's not just about the technology, but the ability to get the organizations to buy in that will allow network automation to grow and have the kind of impact that we wanted to have. So with that, I want to ask you if this kind of scenario feels familiar. You know, everybody knows that automation is good for the organization. It improves efficiency. It creates all sorts of positive impacts. And you can, with automation, you can turn the network into a service. And doesn't everybody want that? It's like everyone wants IT to work like the cloud. And you can get more revenue potentially. You can have less downtime. There's all sorts of upsides to more automation. And yet, somehow, with all that being known, you're still told that there's no real budget for network automation, which is super frustrating and little confounding at the same time. Why does this not rise to the level of awareness and impact? Why isn't this more obvious to everyone that this kind of investment should make so much sense? So, and I think that, the answer to this is really about the difficulty in making this case to the broader organization. So one of the things that I think it's helpful to keep in mind in building this business case is that there's someone in the organization or someones in the organization that you're part of that need to sign off on budget. And in gaming terms, you can think of this as like the final boss. And that final boss in your case might be someone at the head of a business unit, might be chief financial officer or someone in the finance team or some other committee of people who have to make a decision about these kinds of investments. But whoever that final boss is, they are likely not very familiar with network automation. They are not tracking, they're not technical, they are dealing with things at a business level. And that's one of the chief challenges of creating this kind of business case is that you're not talking the same language. And you've got to win that person over. So this is one of the chief challenges of getting this sort of thing going. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about myself, what my qualifications are for this talk, because since I'm a marketer and by trade, and I'm not a network automation architect or an IT, director or a VP of IT ops or anything like that. What is it that qualifies me to talk to this? Well, one thing is that I've had to justify spending a lot of money to a lot of companies. And so I've had to go through that process of establishing a case for why we want to make certain investments. And I've had a modicum of success in my career in doing these kinds of things. But in some ways, it's at least as relevant that I've also had some notable failures in terms of my connecting to my audience about why they should believe in a certain direction or why they should listen to some marketing nerd who wants to do certain innovative new things, um, and be able to win hearts and minds, right? To get that investment, get budget, and keep things on the track that I wanted to go. So I've had times when that has not worked out for me, in various companies, and those were sad but good learning experiences. And I think we can all relate to the kind of struggle of trying to translate from a domain of expertise that we have to those who are not plugged into that domain at the same level, who don't have the same expertise and familiarity and maybe like natural sympathy towards wanting to invest. So I think that has given me a lot of perspective on, um, what are the kinds of things that can help and what are the kind of things can detract from establishing that sort of business case. So, um, with that, I want to focus on three big building blocks of business case success. The first is to build trust now by managing up and out. Um, the second is to, run the numbers that people care about. Pardon me. Excuse me. Um, must have allergies happening here. And the third is to tell a value story that connects, to this audience that is not so familiar, who aren't in domain, and who don't understand and don't necessarily care about network automation naturally. So, one of the things I think, is an important thing to start with is, um, when we think about building trust now, is is that particularly for those of us who've grown up in a particular domain and have managed in that domain, or especially if we're on the newer side in being in managing or directing groups, is that it's very easy, for us to focus downward into our function. And and what that means is that we're so used to doing the job that as we grow up into more of a management role, we're very focused on the execution of the team under us, and that's natural. It's a good thing. I mean, that's not a bad thing at all. So you're looking, to ensure that all the operational pieces of execution are going right, and you're also thinking about like how are my people doing, and am I supporting them, and all those are very important and necessary parts of managing, but um, that's not all there is to being effective as a manager. And one of the problems with focusing downward, too much, is that you do not create a path for your team to succeed in the broader organization. Um, and I remember, a boss of mine or a manager of mine at one time gave me a really good sort of like framework for understanding this, which was to talk about first team and second team. You know, as a manager, you're part of a team of peers. You're reporting to, a manager that you all report up to, and there's others above them. And he talked about how the first team was actually your peers, and your manager and your peers. That's your first team, and your second team is actually the people you manage. And that was sort of a mindset shift for me. I mean, I think I already operated to some degree that way, but it was a really helpful tool to think about where's my focus going. If I don't spend, at least equal care, if not more care, towards managing up and out to my peers and other stakeholders in my organization, I can do the best job of curating the performance and the operation of my team, but I'm creating sort of a low ceiling of potential for the impact that my team can have. And whether or not you're running a marketing team or, you're running a network automation architecture and development team, the effect is the same. Is that if you're not spending that kind of investment to influence, connect, network, get input, and really create awareness, uh, around your with your peers and the stakeholders above and beyond, even beyond your immediate organization, you're going to limit how far your team can go in creating impact. And with network automation, because in many organizations a newer thing. It's not well understood. The network team itself and what it does and its day to day may not be well known outside of your particular domain. That's is equally important, probably more important than marketing. At least most people actually think they know what marketing is. In fact, many marketers would say that many other people think they are actually marketers. It's in some ways maybe too well known or too familiar. That's another issue. But network automation is probably the exact opposite. It tends to be much less known. And so if you want to create a pathway of success for your team, you have to treat all those other stakeholders more like your first team so that you can create the opportunity, the awareness, the familiarity for others to buy into, to understand what you're doing, to understand the impact of the network, and understand why network automation can be so valuable. So one of the things that this requires a certain degree of curiosity and a little bit of courage to get out of your domain and explore. So I thought about this analogy, which is the I Spy book series. I it's a pretty popular one. I think it is still, and I know a lot of people who either um, you know saw these or read these books to the kids or whatever. But the idea of this book is it's packed with all these sort of interesting visual artifacts, and it invites you to notice differences and trends, and or kind of anomalies that are interesting. It requires a lot of curiosity. I actually went to an art exhibit once for the artist who did all this, and what's really fascinating is that this artist actually builds intricate 3D sets uh, and then photographs them. So they're real things that have been built in a tremendous amount of detail. So it's pretty fascinating, but we have to develop that level of curiosity about what's going on beyond our domain in an organization, to learn the perspectives of others and how they see the network team, how they even understand what that is and what network automation is and what the role of automation is in the organization, and to start to create those connections by being observant, by asking good questions, by delving into people's points of view. And if we turn this around, we have to create curiosity about the network and network automation for us to gain success. If others can get inspired by what they can discover through our interactions, that's going to be a lot easier for us to make that case in the future. So this is a lot about getting curious in your organization, and it then helps us to uncover a lot of valuable information and discover who can help us and how the organization thinks, what makes it tick, and how does that all relate to what we want to drive an investment for in terms of network automation. So with that, here's some ways to think about managing up and out, is to the kinds of categories to start thinking about and discovering for yourself, and making and connecting the dots around these things. What kind of organization are you part of? Is it a mission-based organization, or is it motivated primarily by money? Like commercial, organizations they're all about the top and the bottom line, as it were. They have shareholders, and those shareholders want a return on their investment, and that's really the whole primary motivation of the organization. Whereas there are organizations that are mission based. These may be public institutions or nonprofits or other things that are really oriented towards let's say it could be a life-saving mission, it could be a charitable mission, it could be a security and safety mission. It could be all sorts of different kinds of missions, but those are really distinct, right, as an organizational prime motivator versus money. Money always matters to organizations because they have to afford to do things, including accomplish a mission. So that's never out of the picture, but the primary motivator may be different. Is it is a regulated business that has to be concerned with, the compliance to certain kinds of regulations? And if so, what are the penalties and the structure and the scope of what happens if you do or don't comply with those kind of regulations? Um, and the other sort of thing is to think about structure and scope. And this, in from the point of view of getting investment, is understanding where does the money come from in the organization, right? Where does the budget sit? Who has to approve? Who owns that? You know, like if you're part of a business unit in a larger organization, is it all just centered in the business unit, or do you have to go above and beyond that, for example? Or maybe you're part of a mid-sized organization where it's all really one big sort of approval process for the whole organization, for any significant investment, and in which case you might be going up to the CFO of the organization. So beyond those sort of core organizational characteristics are things about direction and status. Like, if you're in a market, where do you sit in the market? What's your status in the market? Um, for example, if you think about in retail, are you in growth mode or are you in a maintenance mode? I mean, it matters whether or not you're building lots and lots of new stores versus you are trying to manage, year over year growth in an existing footprint of stores. That's a very different sort of state of a retail organization to be managing it. What's the strategy behind that? How is the organization thinking about how it's going to achieve its goals? The What defines success from the point of view of metrics or from the point of view of any other criteria? I think these are some of the things that you can discover as you discuss these kinds of issues and motivators with stakeholders that you connect with. And then if you're in a market, who are your competitors and what are they doing, and how should you think about the stance of the organization and the role of automation in helping you competitively? These are all things that I think you can consider in terms of like the direction and the motion of the organization, because where the organization, how it's moving and where it stands and how it's trying to move relative to where it stands can have a big impact on how it views an investment like network automation. And then the final thing is figuring out the stakeholder map. Who are the people? Who are the decision makers? Who's going to actually release the budget for this? Is that a CFO or is that someone else? Who are the influencers? Who are the sponsors who can help amplify and support you? Who are the people who you can refer to and reference in terms of the impact of network automation on their discipline? Who are the folks that have a voice, who are sitting at the table, who can help sponsor you? And even very importantly, don't forget who are the potential detractors. And these might not be necessarily, it doesn't mean that they're, enemies per se, or, toxic or something like that, but more so that they may have a different point of view or different set of priorities, and they're not going to be pulling for you. And you have to understand their motivators and why, get in their shoes, so you can make a cogent case as to why your case for investment should be supported. Okay, so these are some helpful prompts for managing up and out. Now let's move from that, which is, there's a lot we've talked about, which is about the people side of things, which is extremely important. Once you get to that, then you have to start to think about how to make a case for your investment that fits where people are at, where the organization is at. And I think it's very tempting to get into a perfectionism about having to have all the numbers and have an overwhelming amounts of numbers. But that's actually not usually that effective. The key thing is to not try to make the numbers perfect so much as to try to make the numbers meaningful to the stakeholders who really are going to have a say in this. So There's an interesting sort of analogy here, which is, ordering a pizza. If you've ever had to order a pizza with others, or if you've ever gone to a pizza shop, they have a lot of ingredients, right? They might have 100 ingredients on the menu. If you actually try to make a decision about ordering a pizza and go past relatively few set of ingredients, you quickly bog down, right? Because the more individual things you have to figure out, make decisions on, the more friction there is. And the point here is to get fed, not to like have the perfect ingredient list, right? Um, and that's why, for example, pizza places, yeah, they have a long list for the people who want to be really finicky. But the most people just order the preset packages. And the vast majority of people just order cheese or pepperoni, at least in the United States. So there's a reason for that. Like simplicity sells, right? Simplicity eases decisions. So you want to focus your numbers on the things that are going to really move the needle for the people who are listening to the business case. Um, and the if I think it's just important to keep in mind that you don't overdo the numbers so much as keep them focused. So what kind of numbers are going to matter to your organization? All right. So there's four primary drivers for investment. Um, make more money, accomplish the mission, if those are the two different types of organizations. Um, Save money. Everybody likes to save money. That's kind of a universal one. And avoid risk. These are the four drivers of investment. And so I actually did a survey of every single case study, whether written or presentation, that I could find on network or related infrastructure automation, and I kind of broke down these things. And I saw this pattern across these things. And there's usually going to be a primary driver, and then there may be secondary drivers. Um, so, for example, if you have a business that is running on the network, you're a service provider, you're a SaaS or e-commerce company, you're high growth mode where network availability and readiness makes an impact on your ability to, let's say, launch a new retail location and get it live and making money, like retail store time to value, and e-commerce, and other sort of digital platforms. Customer experience has a real impact on revenue. Um, you can build a case for higher revenue or higher retention. Retention's super important in terms of anything with repeat business, like subscription businesses. Revenue is the best thing to build a primary use business case on, because that's a net add to the business. It's pretty hard to argue with making more money. If you're in a mission focused organization, there will be some aspect of enabling the mission to happen. For example, if you've got teams working in the field for life-saving, security, safety reasons, enabling those teams in the field versus those teams being disabled in their ability to accomplish the mission adds up to like services delivered or lives saved, or whatever, or lives impacted, people impacted, that sort of thing. And that sort of is a major measurable investment driver. The savings is one of the most common primary use cases for most enterprises, saving time spent on typing versus doing more valuable things. So, for example, if you're running a large campus or you're running a bunch of stores, and how much staff does it take to maintain and run the network versus just because of manual labor versus being able to do more valuable things. Staff productivity, efficiency, accuracy. Now, one of the things to be wary of is, or just to think about how this actually turns into benefit, is the relative value of employees' time. Like spending time typing is a very low value use of expensive employee time, right? Highly trained IT people's time is not used well through typing. There are things that IT staff can be doing which are much more valuable that will create return in other areas. For example, if you said, hey, instead of like doing manual configurations, we're going to have staff focused on ensuring that we can reduce vulnerabilities, or ensure that we're patching our systems more effectively, or doing analytics to progress certain projects. Those uses of time have a much higher return. So the relative difference in value of the return on the time is where you make up that's where you reduce the waste. You could be wasting the potential value of their time by spending it on typing and manual configuration, or you can be spending it on much higher return. And there's a differential value there that you can measure. The other thing is, when you have accuracy issues, those can cause outages. Outages are always expensive. They're measurable in staff time, in revenue, and various things like that, and other disruptions, brand and other impacts that can be measured in a financial way. And that's how you can kind of build a savings-based case. Much of automation business cases often efficiency based or accuracy based. So this is a very common one. The final thing to not neglect is risk. There is a cost to risk. How does that cost get reflected in an organization? Well, if you have, let's say, regulatory risk, like if you think we're going to mess up and we're going to have fines, the finance team has to budget for those fines. If you think you're going to have a breach, or you're going to have a certain number of breaches, there's going to be a cost to those breaches, not just the regulatory things, but brand damage or actual losses in some other tangible fashion that lost revenue or lost productivity. Those sorts of things do have a cost, and those have to be budgeted for. So if you can avoid loss, then that is a savings category. So if you're in a regulated or highly targeted, type of organization from a cybersecurity threat point of view, that risk is costly. By reducing the probability of breach or compliance fines, you can save money that can be repurposed. Because if you say, hey, look, we can reduce the risk by this percentage per year, that budget now gets to go to something else. It doesn't get to be planned or have to be spent on losses. So risk is a real category for certain kinds of organizations that shouldn't be neglected. Okay, so we've gone over some major categories. It's also important not just to know the drivers, but these primary drivers, but also to think about some probably softer categories. There are leadership initiatives, at the town hall, at the beginning of the year. The CEO announces, or the business, the head of the business unit, announces certain kinds of initiatives. We're going to be focused on this year. We're going to devote this kind of resource and all that sort of thing to it. There may be corporate or cultural imperatives. The organization decides we're going all in on, let's just say we're going all in on AI. Everybody's doing that, right? But what does AI require? It requires, a lot of systems to be ready for AI. Automation is key to that. Right? If you can't automate, there's no way you can serve the data and use AI effectively if you can't even automate it pre-AI, right? Those are examples of initiatives or corporate or cultural imperatives. However, you should approach these with a note of caution, which is to get guidance from sponsors and stakeholders on where to place these in your business case. Sometimes, leaders will say, we're going all in on this, but when you go to the people who actually have the money, they'll say, well, that's really nice, but we have no budget for that big initiative. So just be careful that you don't get caught in between the message and the reality of the budget in terms of building your business case. Beyond the drivers, it's also really important to know how your organization wants a business case to be constructed. Now, network automation is in most cases considered like a major development project if it's going to get serious investment. And that tends towards a Capex investment model. So that's going to be probably more common in most cases. And the Capex investment model is basically based on the idea of a total cost of ownership reduction by comparing how much it costs to run things in the network in an automated versus manual operations way, and typically over 5 years. And you can do a return on investment calculation and a net present value calculation. These are both common. Um, Net present value is sort of like is a way of calculated, you know, a discounted value of money over time, right? Because money that's saved today is worth more than money that's saved, in 3 years. So I'm super simplifying the concept. You can read up on this yourself. You know, return on investment is a more simplified sort of measure that just says here's the percentage of return we'll get on, from the input of this investment, how much we'll get out relative to it. And then, so, and this is all calculated then over a 5 year period based on sort of an assumed rate of discount on money over time, right? Annual discount of money. So you can end up with, say, hey, we're going to put a certain amount of investment into into network automation. We're over 5 years, we're going to reduce the total cost of ownership of the network by $1 million plus. We're going to get a 77% return on investment. Our 5 year net present value is going to be this much. And another key term that you should look into it. And I'm not trying to give you a full education on these terms. There's plenty of ways for you to learn this stuff online. Another key term is internal rate of return. What's our rate of return over time? So that's probably the most common, but there may be cases where you're trying to just uh, create the business case for investing in a particular tool, which may be a software or a SaaS tool. And in those cases, the organization may want to have an OpEx, a business case made, which is typically around what's the time to pay back? How long does it take to get the savings from the investment to equal the money you put in? And again, you compare the current waste of manual work to automation investment. You also want to, do a savings over 3 to 5 years typically as well. So, for example, maybe you can get, a 9 month payback because, you have 480,000 annual costs due to time wasted on manual work and outages due to errors, and versus a certain amount of investment, year one, and 360K, year one, you're gonna make that back based on the annual costs you can save in 9 months, right? That's a 9 month payback. And let's say you're going to have, that's your year one investment because you have to invest in maybe some contract work or whatever it is beyond the actual licensing or subscription. And then after that, you've got a $250,000 annual automation investment that's primarily subscription. And over time, you can say, all right, based on that, the annual savings, will add up, and the 5 year OpEx savings will be this much. All right, so you construct it's a somewhat different approach to the business case. The key point here is not that I'm trying to educate you exactly how to do this, but to understand how your business wants to get a business case made for the type of investment you're proposing. Once you are doing this high level number sort of curation, like what are the things that you really want primarily position as the value versus secondary drivers and things like that, and construct the right type of business case, it's also important to know how these impacts will relate to operational metrics that the business actually uses, right? That you can point to as evidence. So, for example, if you say we're going to increase retention of subscribers, or in a SaaS business, then lower downtime, improve CSAT scores, faster mean time to repair. These are the kinds of things that are probably being measured in your organization. There may be others, and those can support the notion of increased retention. As sort of tributaries to, like, yeah, we're seeing a rise in retention, but we know that this investment is helping because of these factors, right? And you need to have stakeholders who own those metrics be aligned with you. So you want to be consulting with them again early, managing up and out, to kind of connect those dots with them. Does this make sense? Can you see the value in investing network automation to lower downtime, improve CSAT, get faster time to mean time to repair, because your observability tools can pull the right information from our intent database, for example. Your stakeholders need to back you up, and then you need to be able to be ready to report on those results over time. So you can present that as, here's the evidence points that will back us up, and we can report on them. Another would be reduce waste or lower outage costs, and the reduced waste would be the evidence of that is that you'll be able to support growth with the new initiatives or support new initiatives with the same staff level. And again, you need to get stakeholders say, yeah, we can do that. Like, if we implement this automation, reduce this amount of manual work, we'll be able to repurpose staff to these things, or we'll be able to, have the same staff support next year's growth without additions, that sort of thing, because it would just be much more effective and efficient. So again, connect the dots to operational metrics so that you have evidence to back up your claims, and you have stakeholders to back up your metric claims, right? And then also that you can bring the evidence and reporting later on. I want to point out that there are, in terms of constructing detailed sort of business cases, there's some really great work going on in the Network Automation Forum, in terms of, the kinds of the kinds of ways you can to create specific sort of business cases. And I'm showing an example of this. That, there's, if you join the Network Automation Forum Slack, there is a BOF business cases channel that you can jump into, and there's some really good work going on there. I just clicked on the public chat. I didn't have it displayed. First of all, yes, we will we'll make the slides available. I think customer success support teams will typically run CSAT or NPS on a regular basis. So that's one way you can measure customer sat. I think the resolution of issues, and mean time to repair is an important one, because it tends to be such a costly operational motion in an organization. It also tends to like eats a lot of resources every time there's a repair needed, right? So I think those are the ones that I think about off the top of my head, that are being measured in some fashion typically. So you don't want to have to invent a whole new category of operational metrics to support your business case. So it's, can you absolutely connect something like network automation to like retention? But I think there are definitely good ways to link some of these metrics, that they are clearly linkable. But the difference between linkable and absolute proof is always obviously debatable. So anyway, hope that helps. Yeah, and I think there's great stuff happening in this forum. Folks who are working in this space. And yes, the fourth wall break. Okay, so the last kind of thing I want to talk to is just creating the value story, which is, and I thought about this term, which is that facts don't speak for themselves. We've been told that, like, the facts speak for themselves, but that's just not true. You actually have to speak for them, because oftentimes they're just not interpretable on their own, right? So, and the way that you do that is you refer back to those primary drivers. Those drivers are simple ideas: make more money, avoid risk, that sort of thing. And what you want to do is, like a bicycle chain, you want to connect or attach those drivers which are the story part. That's the pedal. That's the stuff that actually gets you, mental and emotional traction, right? Why do people invest? There's actually lots of interesting uh, theory about this. I don't really get into this in my slides, but why do people invest is a combination of logic, right? There are logical, rational needs that have to be met, and that's what the numbers do, right? But there's also emotional needs, right? And if you think about like the primary, that's why we look for those primary drivers. What drives the organization? Money, mission, all that sort of thing. Or, in some cases, due to, organizational trauma, risk is the most important thing, right? Let's say the organization has had a shareholder lawsuit or something like that in the past, 5 years ago, and everybody's traumatized by it. So everybody's all about avoiding risk. That's a motivating driver that's going to have a big influence on the mindset of people making investment. How do we avoid risk? Well, risk is then could be elevated in the calculation of the investment relative to other things. So like your storyline might need to be attached a little bit more to that than it might be in another organization. Think about what's going to because risk, for example, or making more money or accomplishing the mission, not only have logical, support that you can give through numbers, but you can also attach to people's personal motivations. What's going to, what's going to advance my career? What's going to give me career satisfaction? Things like that. How do I fulfill my personal mission in my job? And understanding the persona and the people and what's driving them is really important. But those kind of major drivers and understanding those things is a big part of the puzzle. The better you can understand the people, then the more personalized you can be in that context, even better. But the key thing here is that the story is the driver. It's the pedal. The numbers and all the logic are the thing that support that, right? People buy more, generally speaking, more on story than they do on numbers, right? Because it's the framing that matters so much to understand why those numbers are the priority. I mean, there's lots and lots of numbers. You can do endless numbers of things that would have benefit, but you can't do everything. What's going to make the difference? It's going to be the aligning to the value drivers. So, in a sense, you could get to sort of the 5 slides and the truth. I mean, this may or may not be, the exact formula, but I think the key thing is keep it simpler is better. This is what are the business drivers, which are trying to tell the story of like, why now? Why do we want to make this investment now? Why is this important now? Then you want to get into selling the problem. What's the current state problem and what's the estimated annual impact? Illustrating that, getting that problem statement across with impact is terribly important because that then sets the context for the investment and the outcomes, which is where you get into the meat of the logical evidence. Like, here's what we're going to do. Here's our plan, right? We've got a problem. We've got a plan to solve this problem. Here's the investment required. And here's the financial outcome. Here's the strategic outcome. And that's where you tie it back to those business drivers. Because the financial outcome in OpEx or Capex terms and things like that is one aspect of it. But, for example, if you said, hey, we're gonna reduce adage, and that's going to create an increase in retention. It's going to drive higher revenue. It's going to be brand enhancing. But not only that, strategic outcome. Let's say the strategic business driver is growth. Commercial growth. It's going to position us. Relative to our competitors, if more competitive, it's going to enhance our a brand appeal to organizations who might want to invest in our style of product because we're going to be highly progressive. We're going to be highly accurate, effective. We're going to deliver a great experience. And, if we're considering sort of other growth measures, like acquisitions or things like that, or other inorganic growth, is going to make us ready to absorb those and drive growth further. Similar story might be on risk. Hey, we have, all these threats or risk points that we're having to budget a lot of money for. And the reason is we have a lot of manual work that creates errors, creates compliance fines or security risks, that sort of thing. We have a plan for that. We're going to solve that. We're going to reduce the costs. We're going to avoid risk. We're going to have risk adjusted loss avoidance, as the payoff for this from a financial point of view. But strategically speaking, what does this mean is that as we grow, we're going to be able to grow with less burden of risk. If we don't reduce the risk now, the risk just grows as we grow, right? The business. But if we reduce that risk footprint now, as we grow the business, that risk, stays flat or goes down. So that creates so much more lift for the business. That's a business driver strategic story, beyond just like, here's how much money we can save. So drivers, problem, investment, financial outcome, strategic outcome, that ties back to the big business drivers. And I think that's a story flow that helps, again, make sure that the pedal is the one that's, getting exercised to move that story forward. So I think that's actually, what I just kind of illustrated here. And this is just a silly example of like reducing cybersecurity and compliance risk. And, in our fiscal year priorities, that's a priority for this business unit. And, I've given some other examples of that, but this is a risk-based one. I like using risk-based ones because they're less common. But the impact strategically is we're going to have a more resilient business. We're going to have a higher trust as a brand. We're going to enable our growth, right? And that's one of the things that can get left out if you just focus on like, here's how much we're going to save, the end. No, there's more to that because the future, is going to benefit too, not just this particular project. So coming back to kind of sum up, the building blocks of business case success, build trust now by managing up and out. When's the best time to plant a tree? 10 years ago. Second best time now, right? So like, build that trust now, manage up and out, change, like really this is hearts and minds, get curious, get courageous, build those connections, learn, create perspective, create curiosity. Then with all that stakeholder support and all that, you can build and run the numbers that people care about. Finally, you can then wrap that all up into a value story that's driven by the primary drivers, that pedal the bike with your primary drivers, connect those to the logical supports of the numbers, and always bring it back to the strategic outcome. And I think that's a very successful way to build a business case that hits at the logical level, the human level, the organizational priority level. And with that, I think, let's see here. And yeah, I think that, definitely tune into the NAF channel. There's a lot of really great work going on, a lot of data being collected, as Graham has been pointing out in the chat. There's a lot of good work there, and if I think if you use this sort of way of approaching it in your organization, you'll be able to make really strong use of the kind of those very helpful raw materials and tools that are being developed. But always just remember that all happens in an organizational and human context. And if you pull all those things together, you can be very successful in making your business case. All right, that's really what I have for today. We can close this for today. So really appreciate everyone's time who's joined us. Thanks everyone.